Thomas Shom Miriam V'lohoyom Mayim Lo Eda. Bamidbar chapter 20 describes for us an instant crisis for the Jewish people in the desert. The whole nation are still in the desert. Miriam dies, and as a result of that, the water dries up. For all those years, there had been the Be'era Shel Miriam, one of the most beautiful, miraculous facets of the narrative of the Jewish people in the desert, is they were constantly accompanied by the life-giving force of the Zechus of Miriam, a well of water that provided enough drinking water and bathing water and water for tahara, for mikveh. All that came from Be'era Shel Miriam. In her Zechus, Klal Yisrael lived, had the Mayim Chayim, the water of life, for all those years, and suddenly we are now, in Bamidbar chapter 20, we are in the 40th year of the desert. And Miriam dies, and suddenly there's no water, and there's an instant crisis. If you're in the desert with your children and your family, and suddenly the water dries up, the crisis is massive, and the crisis is imminent. And what do? They go to Moshe and Aaron, and indeed Moshe and Aaron solve the problem. Sure enough, shortly after that, the water is flowing nicely, and they are once again ensured of being able to survive. So much so, in fact, that in chapter 21, they sing the Shiras HaBe'er. They sing the song of the Be'er, of the well of water, Ali Be'er Enu La, 4 psukim of beautiful Shira about the Be'er. But in the process of Moshe Rabbeinu solving this problem, something went wrong. Moshe Rabbeinu somehow mishandled this event in a way that he hadn't mishandled anything before at all. Moshe Rabbeinu had solved any number of crises in the past, whether it was Paro, or whether it was the Yam Suf, or whether it was at Har Sinai, or the Egel. All the different situations he'd been in had always been solved by Moshe Rabbeinu, but suddenly now he somehow got this a little bit wrong, and as a result of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, Al Kain, therefore, you will not lead the Jewish people into the land of Israel. And this needs a bit of a closer examination. What exactly happened here? What went wrong? And what is the point of this? So at one level, there's a very interesting point, which is brought out by the Meshech Chochmah, who says it was extremely important for the future of the Jewish people that Moshe Rabbeinu should be shown to be fallible, that he was human, and that his life came to an end, and that whole generation had to see him die and be buried outside of Israel. And newly, why? Because had Moshe Rabbeinu taken them out of Mitzrayim, given them freedom, given them the Torah, taught them how to do tshuva for the Egel, brought them through the Midbar, and then taken them into Eretz Yisrael and settled them and conquered the land, he would have become a godlike figure. They would have been in danger of worshipping Moshe Rabbeinu. He would have become somebody of such immense stature that there was no way they could avoid human worship, which would be, in which case the kilkul would be greater than the revach, says the Meshech Chochmah. The damage would be greater than the benefits, because it would affect the actual emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it was important at some level that Moshe Rabbeinu was shown that he was a human being and that he could also make a mistake. How did he come to make that mistake? Different interpretations. The Rambam, for example, speaks about the problem of anger. That Moshe Rabbeinu, after 40 years, he suddenly heard the way they complained about the water, and it triggered off in him a single moment of anger, that was a lapsed moment of anger. And that he allowed himself to be angry was on his level, that was an unforgivable chait. Other Mefarshim suggest that maybe he made the mistake because he was simply in Avelus for his beloved sister. Miriam had been with him his entire life, had stood by him and helped him and looked after him and been there all the time, and suddenly she's died. And she's just now died. Today she's died. So Moshe Rabbeinu is an Avelus, and now suddenly he's called upon to solve this problem. When a person is in Avelus and overwhelmed by sadness, we find, for example, with Yaakov Avinu, the pasuk there says that because he was in Avelus for Yosef, he lost his Ruach HaKodesh. He lost his ability when he's told that Yosef is alive. It says, "Vatachi Ruach Yaakov Aviem." His Ruach, says Rashi, his Ruach HaKodesh returned to him after 22 years. He didn't have his divine inspiration. Because of what? Because of the sadness of his avelut, of his mourning. Similarly here, one could imagine that on the day that Miriam dies, Moshe Rabbeinu has a tinge of mourning, even on his madrega. He is sad, and possibly this has affected him in some way that momentarily he doesn't do exactly what he should have done. What was his mistake, though? And here we get into a much deeper issue. The mistake was seemingly he was told to do something which on the face of it sounds a little bit absurd. He was told, "V'dibartem al hasela," go and speak to this rock and convince the rock to continue producing water. Now, speaking to the rock sounds like a rather ridiculous thing to say. What could this possibly have meant? Different interpretations. The Das Hakenim of Ali Atosfos, for example, says clearly that Dibartem el Hasela doesn't mean to speak to the rock. Obviously not, he says. It means Dibartem to speak to them, speak to the Jewish people, El Hasela, concerning the rock, concerning the water. But what should you say to them? So here we have the Hamek Dov, the Netziv, brilliantly explaining that what they needed to understand was that this was the 40th year. And the 40th year was a preparatory year for entering Eretz Yisrael. And to enter Eretz Yisrael, it's no good anymore to rely on explicit miracles. The miracles that we're going to have in conquering and settling the land of Israel are all nistar, they're all hidden. The hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hidden. There's not going to be any more the splitting of the Red Sea. There's not going to be any more obvious makkahs. That's not going to happen anymore. But the Yad Hashem is going to be Hashgacha Nisteres. And in order to connect to the Hashgacha Nisteres, you have to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you have to learn Torah, and you have to do the mitzvahs, and that is the deal. The deal is HaKadosh Baruch Hu will look after Klal Yisrael, right? In B'chukosei Teilecho Mitzvos Tishmru V'Asisem Osam V'Nosati Gishmeichen Be'itam, says the pasuk, that the survival of Klal Yisrael depends on Klal Yisrael understanding that whatever we get is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it comes because we are living a life of Torah and mitzvahs and of tefillah. So Moshe Rabbeinu should have, says the Netziv, Moshe Rabbeinu should have given them this lesson, but it was a new class. It wasn't the same class that he'd been teaching for the last 40 years. For the last 40 years, he's been teaching the class of Hisyatzavu Uru'u as Yeshuas Hashem. Just watch the miraculous power of God. Now it's a whole new generation, a new stage in life, and a new class. The class is Emunah. The class is Tefillah and Torah and mitzvahs, and having faith and trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and going forward with that faith and trust on the basis of our tefillahs. That will open the flow of the water again. And that's what the V'dibartem al Hasela was supposed to mean. Instead of which Moshe Rabbeinu took the matter and he hit the rock and he performed a miracle, which was exactly what they didn't need to see at this point. They didn't need to have more miracles. They needed to have a new mechanism. And interestingly, the mechanism of Emunah is a mechanism which actually puts a greater emphasis on Klal Yisrael themselves, tells them, you know what, you are greater than you think you are. You're not just passive recipients of the miracles of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You are a shutaf b'maaseh bereishis. You are actually partners with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the survival of the Jewish people, in the future of Klal Yisrael, by davening, by learning Torah, by keeping mitzvahs. That then you can engage in life in Eretz Yisrael and understand that he comes min hashamayim. Interestingly, also in Parshas Chukas, at the end of the last part of Parshas Chukas, for the first time, the Jewish people engage in battle. So we know that they had been in battle formation, Degel Machane Yehuda, Degel Machane Reuven, Degel Machane Ephraim, Degel Machane Don. They'd been in battle formation, Kol HaYotzei Tzava B'Yisrael, but they hadn't yet fought any battles. Suddenly now there's Sichon Melech HaEmori and Og Melech HaBashan, and they're fighting to conquer Transjordan. And that battle had to take place with Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also with a sword. Romamos El Bigroinom, the Cherev Pifios B'Yodam. Right? They needed the cherev in their hand, but Romamos El Bigroinom, but also with their mouth, with in their throat, so to speak, they're speaking about the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the secret that Klal Yisrael needed in order to enter Eretz Yisrael. That both the water, the sustenance, and the victory in battle, all that is going to come miyad Hashem. The hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, provided they understand that a life of emunah is the key to the way in which Klal Yisrael are going to go forward. But Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't lead them there, because Moshe Rabbeinu was living on a different level. The Sfas Emes says there's a difference between emes and emunah. Moshe Rabbeinu lived on a level of Moshe Emes for Terosa Emes. The Emes of the Torah is pure and absolute and doesn't need any, if you like, dilutions, or it doesn't need to be hidden in any way. It's absolute and total. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu's life. But to actually train a new generation into a life not so much of Emes, but more of Emunah, right? The Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we are going to engage in physical activities, build Eretz Yisrael physically with our hands, fight the battles with our hands, but at the same time, we are fueled and driven by Emunah, by Tefillah, and by mitzvahs. That was the new class he should have taught, and in that sense, he mishandled it. He couldn't in that way. That's what the Sfas Emes says, that Moshe Rabbeinu's level of Hanhaga, of Emes, was not suitable for the next generation. I saw once an interesting connection of this to the Gemara in Baba Basra, which says that Moshe was like the Pnei HaChama and Yeshua was like the Pnei HaLevana, comparing the sun to the moon, Moshe and Yeshua. Moshe is the sun, Yeshua is the moon. So the simple Perush is that the light of the moon is a reflection of the sun, right? Everything that Yeshua had, he had because he was a Talmud of Moshe. But there's something very profound here, and that is that when Moshe was there, when you have the sun shining, you can't see any stars. The light of the sun is blinding. The beauty of the light of the moon is that it's not blinding, and therefore there's room for all the other stars to shine. So the rest of Klal Yisrael were able to shine, were able to have an effect, that their tefillah and their emunah and their hishtadlus, everything should be part and parcel of entering Eretz Yisrael. So Yeshua was the leader who didn't obscure all the greatness of all the other millions of stars, meaning all the other millions of Klal Yisrael. Everybody had a role to play. When Moshe Rabbeinu was there, he was the sun, and everybody else was blinded by it, and they followed him completely. But as the Hamek Dava says so beautifully, this parsha is, if you want to use a mashal of human life, is the moment when a small baby is weaned off the milk and begins eating solids, right? They needed to go through a period where the Jewish people were looked after by Moshe Rabbeinu and spoon-fed by him. But now they were reaching a point where they were growing up and they needed to be able to eat the solids and be self-sufficient spiritually and physically and enter Eretz Yisrael with confidence. And that was the beginning of Parshas Chukas, and that was the beginning of the future of Klal Yisrael in the land of Israel, that halavai we should be able to live here in this land of Israel, fueled by emunah in the Torah, emunah in our tefillos, and with Yad Hashem, the hidden hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, guiding us and protecting us every step along the way. V'chein yehi ratzon.